Welcome to Law You Should Know. The law affects every aspect of our lives, our home, our jobs, and our recreational activities. Now you can learn about the law and how to protect yourself against the loss of your liberty or property. Learn how to stand up for your rights and seek compensation when you have been wronged. Your host for Law You Should Know is attorney Kenneth J. Landau with the Mineola law firm of Shane, Dox, Denisi, and Corker. He's a member of the Committee on Professional Ethics of the Bar Association of Nassau County and counsel to the Nassau Academy of Law. And now, here is your host for Law You Should Know, attorney Kenneth J. Landau.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome to Law You Should Know. Today we'll be talking about understanding social media, and our guide for that important topic is Marcus Harris, and he's a software litigator at the law firm of Taft, Stenitis, and Hollister, located in Chicago. He works with technology companies and software developers, from startups to publicly traded companies, concerning software development and licensing and ownership issues. Marcus, welcome to Law You Should Know.
Well, Ken, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Now, I guess social media is the new frontier?
Well, I think you can certainly safely say that. There have been a number of high-profile incidents in probably the past 3 to 4 months involving breaches of the terms and conditions of these social media sites and the disclosure of user data to third parties that have really taken over some news stories. You've got the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal, which is at the forefront of my mind, which I think is really indicative of the larger problem, and something that I hope we can talk about today.
Okay, and as a starting point, most people who are using social media do not bother to read the terms and conditions agreement. They're just clicking on accept.
Yeah, and I think that's an incredibly big problem. It certainly as attorneys, that just conceptually is kind of problematic for us. But I think when you're dealing with something as important as your privacy and the way that your data is being used, you want to make sure you understand the terms and conditions, the agreement that you're entering into with one of these social media companies that allows them not only to access your data, but in many respects to exploit that data, your privacy, for their own financial gain. So I think it's incredibly important for users of these sites to have a good understanding of exactly what the parameters are around the particular social media platform's ability to use their own data.
Now, it's really a non-negotiable agreement. You can't pick and choose the extent to which a social media company can use or share your data.
Well, that's certainly, I think that's true to the extent that you don't really have the ability to negotiate that contract, that agreement with the social media company. But in most cases, these social media sites, these platforms, be it Twitter, Facebook, or whatnot, they do have robust systems in place that allow you to narrowly focus or customize the way that third-party applications access or utilize your data and the way that site itself accesses or utilizes your data. So it really makes a lot of sense for any user of social media to have a good understanding of not only the user agreement, the terms and conditions that are applied to that particular platform, but the functionality that's made available to the user. I think it's critical to make use of that and to only allow that particular site to access and utilize the data.
And how do you make sure that happens?
Well, I think you've really got to have a good understanding of not only what that user agreement says the particular platform can do with your data, who can access that data, how they can utilize it, where it goes, but you've also got to make sure that you just understand the functionality and make use of it. And really, it's up to you to be an educated consumer of these services and to make sure that you take the responsibility to the extent you can as to what happens to your data and what you let happen to your data.
So should you be less less willing to use social media or more careful about what you put out there?
I think you always want to be careful about what you put out on social media. I think, to some extent as a consumer, you have some limited ability to control your data. And I think, in the case of Facebook in particular, they've certainly played fast and loose with user data. I think there's other sites that have been equally guilty of that. So, I think to the extent you can control it, you've got to make sure that you utilize the tools that are available to you and you're comfortable with what that site is doing with your data. And to the extent you're not, I think you need to give serious consideration to just abandoning the platform in its entirety.
And it may not be worth the risk if you're giving them carte blanche with all that data out there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, it may not be worth the risk. It depends on what kind of information you're sharing, and what you want to have happen to that information. And I think you don't think that your information is particularly valuable, and in some respects there's trade-offs to it. I mean, I think these sites really, their business model is based on exploiting your personal information. And the kind of the risk reward element to it is that when you use these sites, they track you across the internet. And if you looked at an American Airlines trip to Miami, Florida, for example, that information might then be displayed to you in various ways on different sites that you go to on the internet.
So just tell us the mechanics of how they track you. You go on social media to make a post or send some information. Are they putting a cookie or something on your device, like a little spy in a sense, to tell them what you're doing?
That's exactly what they do. And the hooks that they utilize, I think, are vast. And it's not just cookies, it's other things as well. And there's a whole cottage industry that's sprung up in the last 10 to 15 years, around targeted direct remarketing, which takes that cookie from whatever site and tracks you across the internet, essentially. So yeah, they know what you're looking at. They know what ads to feed to you, and in some ways, that might be helpful, but it also raises some serious privacy concerns and just legal issues in general that go beyond privacy that you need to be aware of. I mean, in the case of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, for example, this user data, personal user data, not only of the user but of their friends, was provided to a third party that was then used for political purposes, and who knows what else it was actually used for. So, your control of that data sometimes can be minimized, and the technology that they use is robust and wide-ranging.
And for the social media companies, their model's not just making money off advertising of your view, but selling access to you as a user and otherwise marketing the data over what you do?
Right. So they've got the business model is pretty vast. I mean, certainly they make money by targeting ads to their user base, but in some cases, they allow developers to access information and data and collect data about users in order to make money as well.
And so it's like the old magazine subscription list. And those sometimes there's an opt-out provision, and but with social media, there's really no opt-out provision. And even going in the future, you can't withdraw it down the road.
Well, that's true to an extent, but I think every social media platform is different, and there are certain opt-out provisions that they will provide to you. So in the wake of this Cambridge Analytica scandal, Facebook sent out various emails to let people know if their data had been compromised, and then there was a link, to their dashboard, the Facebook dashboard, to actually change your privacy settings. So I think it may not be a full opt-out to the extent that you can just not participate, but you can certainly minimize or narrow the scope of access to your private information.
And that is something to pay attention to, putting limits on the access to privacy settings.
Absolutely. I think every user of social media needs to be concerned with that. They need to educate themselves, and they need to know how to utilize those settings.
Okay, and it's really just self-education. The user is going to make it a little bit hard for you to find and utilize those settings because they really don't want you to?
Yeah, I think it's certainly not evident, certainly at first pass. And I think as a user of these platforms, you've really got to educate yourself on how to utilize the tools that are given to you, because they are there. And I think what bodes well to an extent for users of social media and just users of digital technology in general that have privacy concerns is the implementation in Europe earlier this year of the GDPR, which is a wide-ranging and sweeping privacy law and regulation in Europe that I think is going to have massive repercussions here in the United States. And I will guarantee you that in the very near future, there's going to be something that's somewhat analogous to that's implemented in the United States itself, which is legislation that actually dictates what social media companies can do and can't do with your user information.
And the EU is much more hands-on with this than in North America.
Oh, absolutely. The EU is much more hands-on. They've been that way for a very long time. In May of this year, like I said, they implemented this sweeping privacy regulation called the GDPR that really has a substantive impact on not only people in the EU, but people, EU citizens certainly here, and companies that market to the EU.
And sometimes even the social media companies, sometimes their data is just outright stolen. Other bad actors have the ability to or in the past have had the ability to somehow break into their platform and surreptitiously steal your data, which is their data.
Oh, absolutely. That's a real risk that needs to be considered and minimized.
And does social media also need to make sure that there are organizations participating in it are legitimate organizations?
Yeah, I think to the extent that you can have insight into, the organizations that are participating in social media, you want to make sure that they're legitimate organizations.
Okay, we're going to take a short break now. When we return, we'll talk about how the First Amendment plays into this and the current discussion about whether data such as on Google is monitored or is somehow geared or steered in some respect. You're listening to Law You Should Know. We're talking about understanding social media, and our guest is attorney Marcus Harris. This is 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College, also on nccradio.org. We'll be back in a moment.
This portion of programming on WHPC is brought to you on behalf of the Nassau County Bar Association, who wants you to know about ADR, Alternate Dispute Resolution, which can help you avoid costly, lengthy, and uncertain litigation in court. By resolving disputes through mediation or arbitration, it gives you control over who decides your case. A mediator helps all parties to reach an agreement they can live with, or an arbitrator selected by the parties hears and decides the case. Your attorney can still represent you, but you control who decides your case. ADR is faster and less stressful than fighting in court, and it is a great way to resolve divorce, employment, or commercial disputes. ADR is now offered through the Nassau County Bar Association. Find out more about how ADR can help resolve your dispute by calling 516-747-4070 or visit nassaubar.org.
Once again, we continue with Law You Should Know. From the Mineola Law Firm of Shane, Dox, Denise, Corker, and Sauer, here is attorney Kenneth J. Landau.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome back to Law You Should Know. We're talking with attorney Marcus Harris about understanding social media, and he's a software litigator at Taft, Stenitis and Hollister in Chicago, Illinois, and works with technology companies and software developers from startups to publicly traded companies about software development, licensing, ownership, and distribution issues. Marcus, you mentioned some of them earlier, but are